Hello, and welcome to another episode of Dearborn Then and Now. I'm Helen K. Mamalakis, archivist at the Dearborn Historical Museum, and your host for these programs on Dearborn's rich history, brought to you by your local history museum. And today, most appropriately, we have permission to film from the wonderful Henry Ford Museum. As you see behind me are the wonderful artifacts that represent the very popular trend of the 1940s, 50s, and early 60s, the drive-in restaurant. There is one restaurant in particular that we'll be concentrating on, the Sip and Nip, formerly located on Telegraph Avenue. So let's all play some of that old-time rock and roll and prepare to cruise into the land of Elvis, hot dogs, and milkshakes. A drive-in restaurant is different than the drive-through restaurants that we all know so well in our fast food world. A drive-in restaurant is a facility in which you can actually drive in for service and stay there and eat your meal. Traditionally, at a drive-in restaurant, you would drive in, park your car, and your server, or car hop, would come out to your car and take your order. Sometimes you turned your lights on for service. Sometimes you ordered through a speaker provided for you by the drive-in. While Dearborn is not credited for having the first drive-in restaurant in the country, that honor goes to the Pig Stand in Dallas, Texas, which opened in 1921. We certainly did have our own version of the iconic drive-in restaurant. The Sip and Nip restaurant, located on the northwest corner of the intersection of Telegraph and Sheridan, was one of Dearborn's very own drive-in hangouts. It was built in 1946 and owned by the Romanak brothers, Ted and Stan. This painted white concrete brick structure had not only the traditional car hop service available, but also a walk-up window which faced Telegraph Road. This window proved to be especially popular for the children of the area, as the custard ice cream cones served there were considered to be one of the best in the Wayne County area. Mr. David Gordon, former president of the Dearborn Artists Society and Dearborn resident, told me that he and other children of the neighborhood would stop at the Nip almost every time that they went to Seashore Pool, which is still right down the road from where the Sip and Nip originally was located. Of course, a standard teenage food fare was also offered at the Nip. Hot dogs, hamburgers, fries, etc. It was prepared by the Romanak's mother in the daytime and another short order cook at night. Most of the daytime business of the Sip and Nip and most other drive-in restaurants was composed of catering to children and families. The nighttime business was an entirely different story. To thoroughly understand the impact or function of the Sip and Nip, one needs only to speak with the Dearborn resident who had children in the Nip's heyday. Rosemary Jefferson, Dearborn Historical Commissioner and Dearborn resident since 1945, remembers that both of her children were constantly at the Sip and Nip as teenagers. She went on to tell me that after 3:30 in the afternoon, you couldn't get near the place as it was packed with teens. As cars would pull into the Sip and Nip from either Sheraton or Telegraph entrance, they would park and turn their headlights on. This indicated that service was needed. The car hop would then go to the car and take the order. I recently spoke with Brett Bachman, retired Dearborn Heights police officer, who not only worked at the Sip and Nip, but had a very special connection to it. Now, how is it that you came to work at the Sip and Nip? What year did you go there, and how is it that you came to work there?
Well, it was the spring of 1956. One of my best friends, Carl Rausch, was working there. He was leaving for another job, and he said if I was interested to go up there and talk to them, and I did, and they hired me.
So how much an hour were you making?
Wow, probably 75 cents an hour.
And how old were you at that time?
16, heading for 17.
Now, did you have a car by the time you worked there?
I did. I had a 47 Mercury.
Ooh, a nice car.
Well, $125 doesn't buy a lot, but
100?
It ran.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So now, what were your job responsibilities at the Sip and Nip?
Well, generally you had one of two. One was to work at the walk-up window right on Telegraph, and the other was on the back of the building assisting the car hops, making the malts and the shakes and the dairy products and helping them get their tray set up to go out to the cars.
And so, did you do both, or?
Well, you went back and forth.
So, did you actually cook yourself, or did
No.
you just?
Stan and Ted's mother was a cook during the daytime, and most of the food was ready for the evenings.
And what kind of food did they have at the Sip and Nip?
Well, it was pretty basic. Hamburgers, hot dogs, cheeseburgers, grilled cheese.
If you had to say one thing that the Sip and Nip was remembered for, what would that be?
Their custard.
Their custard.
Oh, yeah.
I see.
Everybody loved their custard.
They did. Did you like their custard?
Oh, very good. I could never work the machine, but eating it was very nice.
The Sip and Nip was the place in this area of town to be seen,
Right.
to look for someone, to be seen. Now, did you ever take advantage of it in that way?
When I had met my now wife, our first date was to the Autorama down at State Fairgrounds, and we came back after that and stopped and had a bite to eat there at the Sip.
Okay, but now you took her there because you wanted everyone to see
Well,
her.
of course.
I understand it was for everybody. It was a place for everybody. It was for cruisers like yourself. It was for teenagers. It was for smaller children to get an ice cream cone or a custard cone on the way to Seashore Pool. It was for families. And I would imagine the families got there well before like the cruisers came out, you know, at 9 or 10 o'clock.
More or less during the daytime up to, say, dinner time. And after that, the kids took over.
Well, yeah, pretty much they did it. I spoke with a couple of Dearborn residents, and one woman told me that if her kids weren't at home, she knew they were up there. Another man told me that he spent every Friday night there because that was just where you went.
It was. There was not much else to do. If you had a date or you went to the drive-in or to a football game or a basketball game, everybody went there afterwards.
Do you have a fond memory or two?
Basically, it was just a fun place to work. Kids back in those days, you did get paid a lot, but you worked your fanny off.
Oh yeah, you did.
You appreciated having the opportunity to make a little extra money.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Mr. Bachman, I've read your articles, as many people have in the Dearborn Historian, and I want to thank you very, very much for being here with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
This model of the Sip and Nip was created by Mr. Bachman. Note the details like the sign which tells you to turn on lights for service. This model is part of the collection of the Dearborn Historical Museum. As witnessed by Mr. Bachman, Mrs. Jefferson, and dozens of other Dearborn residents that I have spoken with, the Sip and Nip was one of Dearborn's teenage favorite hangouts in the late 1940s and throughout the 1950s. It was the first place you went if you were looking for somebody. It was the place where you brought your date at the end of the night to show him or her off to the gang. A lot of dates were made and spent at the Sip and Nip. Case in point, of course, being Mr. Bachman bringing his wife, Annette, of 54 years, to the Nip on their very first date. And cars, well, cars were made for the drive-in restaurants. If you had a new car, the Sip and Nip was the place you went to show it off because everyone was there. And if you happened to cruise Telegraph, or the Graph as it was referred to during the highlight of the cruising days of the 1950s, you certainly stopped at the Nip, even if it was just to see what was going on and who was hanging out. The Sip and Nip continued to have wonderful patronage until it closed down and was eventually torn down in 1959. It was in 1959 that Telegraph Road was widened and turned into a divided highway. The Sip and Nip fell victim to progress. The owners, however, went on to open the very successful Three Kegs Round in Dearborn Heights, also located on Telegraph Road. Dearborn is a strong and vital community that has always kept up with the trends of the nation. During the 1950s, it was the drive-ins like the Sip and Nip. And today, Dearborn is a cool Michigan city that is keeping up with trends and moving forward in leaps and bounds. Again, a very special thanks to the Henry Ford Museum for allowing us to come in today and tape this very cool episode of Dearborn Then and Now. On behalf of the Dearborn Historical Museum, I wish you happy cruising.